Good evening and welcome to week 4 in research projects and the methodologies that we're going to use. And in this class, we want to focus on the particular methodologies that you could use in your research project. In our previous week, we've looked at a literature review about the subject topic, about the area that you're looking at, about the questions that you're looking at. But we also want you to look at some research writings on methodologies that can be used to put into action an action research project and then to gather data on this action research project. And so in today's class, we're going to talk about practical steps as to what you could do. And we're also going to talk about deeper concepts, such as the difference between qualitative and quantitative methodologies and some of the paradigms that underpin the methodologies that we're going to use. If you go to week 4 on the Moodle website, you'll see there a list of the learning outcomes that we're going to seek to achieve in this week's class. These outcomes include developing a methodology that you can use and being able to write up the details of this methodology in your proposal and for your final project. And this methodology can be a proposed methodology that you may not carry out in this subject, or it can be an actual methodology that you would carry out in this subject together with your ethics approval and the approval of the teachers and school that you're working in. Either will give you a good mark if you put in the time and the effort. So we're wanting to identify in today's class some of the relevant methodologies that you can use and also some of the practical steps that you could take to complete these methodologies. In terms of the readings, Spencer Clark and Susan Perath have some quite detailed outline of some of the steps that you can take, beginning with some practical insights that you can find into the methodologies that you might be working with. And so I encourage you to have a look at some of these practical insights that they are suggesting, and also thinking about how you will go about carrying out the project that you are looking at doing. So there's steps here on reviewing the literature, developing questions. There are also steps here on preparing for the action research project and other steps on gathering the data. In preparing for the action research projects, it's worth thinking about the practical questions. That is, what classes are available to you? What students are available? What is doable? What are you likely to get approval for from the school and from others in the school? And what would be more challenging to get approval for? What are some other things that you might want to consider? The short time frame. You might want to develop a plan over the next few weeks. You might want to develop a plan over the entire semester and how much time that you've got. Remember, you need to keep focused on the topic. That is, what's the subject you're looking at? How does it relate to English and mathematics and literacy and numeracy? And also, how does it relate to education and what you know about education? You also need to keep focused on a well-developed research question. That is, what is an area that you are interested in, and what's the question, the major question, and the sub-questions that you could address. We particularly favour questions that relate to your area of interest and relate to the opportunities that you have in your teaching. Remember, plan thoroughly, plan thoughtfully, and recognise the timeline that you have to work with. Involve others. Myself, send me an email with information about what you intend to do, and others that you know that you can talk over what you are doing. Look for critical friends or others who could examine your ideas, including those at the schools where you are working or teach. Remember also that you have to, whether you're doing a plan for a research project or carrying out the research project, you've got to prepare a one-page ethical outline of your ethics practice that sets out clearly what you intend to do and how this is clearly ethical. That is, you are careful that no one is disadvantaged and that all ethical needs are met. In particular, you need to be careful about confidentiality. You need to be careful about the rights of those who are participating. You need to be careful with the data that you're gathering and that you are careful with this data. You need to also think about some of the ethical dilemmas that you might face, and could anyone be harmed in any way or disadvantaged in any way or have any negative effect in any way? And if they did, how would this be addressed? Remember, an action research project is primarily about action, so you need to think about what are the actions that can bring benefit to your students and how will these actions be carried out. These will be within a particular topic, which you should be working on and be finalising, and questions that you should be working on and finalising. And this can lead to a working title for your project, some background information and literature review on your project, outlining the aims that you set out to complete, and also specific outcomes of what can be achieved. You might want to develop a planning sheet in which you outline what you're doing, and you might want to show that planning sheet to all those who participate in this. If you go on to chapter 2 of this book that we're looking at, this chapter by Aiton and Sinotis talks about the foundations of qualitative research. Quantitative research is where we measure in numbers what we are seeking to achieve, and qualitative research is where you might do an interview and there might be qualities that you are going to discuss. This is less objective at times and more subjective in that it's about people's ideas. You also want to think about the paradigms that are going to be taken both in your research and also in the values and methods that are used. Often we talk about research as being positivistic. That is, it's positive, it's scientific, it seeks to identify accurately what is happening. However, this is not always easily achieved. We might want to measure the English ability or mathematical ability, but we can't measure everything that's going on in a student's head or in the classroom. And so often a constructivist or interpretivist paradigm is used, whereby we acknowledge that we are interpreting what we observe and record, and the students are also interpreting what is happening, and the school too is interpreting what is happening. A more critical paradigm would also acknowledge that there needs to be critical analysis of some of the power imbalances that might be present in the classroom. That is, gender, male and female, are they being treated equally? The shorter, the taller, the younger, the older, are all students from different cultural backgrounds being treated equally, or do we need to make a more critical approach? And this is another paradigm that we could introduce into our research that goes beyond a simple objective scientific, assuming that we are measuring everything accurately. You don't need to give huge amounts of detail of these theoretical aspects, but you do need to consider them, and you need to write in your assignment some evidence that you've reflected on these theoretical aspects of research and action research and qualitative research and quantitative research in some detail. You need to think more deeply about the assumptions and values of the study that you are doing, and think about what it means to participate in this study in the classroom. You need to think more deeply about the methodology that you might use. That is, are you going to do an interview? Are you going to observe? Are you going to do a case study? Are you going to do an ethnographic survey that's going to consider culture? Think about the methods that you're using and ways that we can gather further information on this method. If you want to dig even more deeply, you could think about the nature of the reality that's around us. This is called ontology, where the researcher recognizes that there are multiple ways of understanding reality. That is, we often assume that the material that can be observed and touched is the reality, but what goes on in our mind and the minds of students is often beyond that which can be easily observed and touched. And what goes on at home and what goes on when people sleep and awake and when they're gazing in the distance, we don't know all that's going on. And so we need understandings of reality that go beyond the limitations of simply what we can observe and measure. We also need to think about epistemology. That is, how do we know and how do we gather information, and how is this information passed on from one to another? And in particular, we need to think about the ethics of what we are doing. That is, how is it ethical and helpful, and how do we work with students so that we're doing the best for them rather than simply to gain some results. So these are called paradigms of research, paradigms of understanding, paradigms of education and knowledge. And you might want to read a bit more about these paradigms. As I said, you don't need to know huge amounts about them, but you do need to give some thought to these paradigms and how they impact on the research that we do and the gathering of information that we are involved in. In Aiton, Sindos and Berkovich's book on qualitative research, which focuses on health and social care researchers and practitioners, but also has application to teachers as well. They talk about the foundations of quantitative and qualitative research and paradigms, and they also talk about some of the theories that are involved in these different approaches. And so you might want to do some reading about these different approaches to research. Such as the approaches to qualitative research and what it involves and how we can understand the different approaches to qualitative research and what is going on. You don't need to understand all of these concepts fully, but you may find here theoretical ideas such as conflict theory. So if students are seeking to understand literature or numbers, are they wrestling with ideas, or is it coming easily? Are there conflicts taking place, and what are some of the causes of this conflicts or anxieties or challenges that they are facing? So there can be various paradigms that can be useful and helpful for understanding what is taking place. In Chapter 4 on theoretical frameworks for qualitative research, you could read further about some of the ways in which scholars have sought to understand what is taking place in terms of behavioural change. That's a method for designing intervention that brings benefit to people. So these are scholarly theories, scholarly ideas that you might want to work with in order to better understand the changes that are taking place. You could also think about the design of your research. That is, in terms of an action research project, how do we understand the actions that we're seeking to carry out and how we're going to measure the effectiveness of them? I suggest that it's important to write at least a paragraph or more in your proposal and then in your final project about what action research involves and how it is carried out and how the results are measured, what the goals of action research are, what the nature of action research are, what's the advantage and disadvantage of action research and how the data is gathered and measured. All of these insights can be gathered and written up in both your proposal and also in your final project. In this book that we're looking at as well, Aiton and others have written about the possibility of doing a case study, the possibility of using mixed methods, and the possibility of using various other approaches in order to understand what is happening. So you could do a case study on a class, you could do a case study on work that you're doing, you could do a case study on some students that could be made anonymous and that you're seeking to be helpful with, and you could write up an ethics approach to that. If we were to do grounded theory, that rather than bringing theories in, we would start from the ground up. And starting from the ground up, we would look at raw data, or we'd come up with ideas about what can we observe, what can we find from our interviews, what information can we gather and how can be analysed, not by bringing ideas in deductively, but by inductively working with the material that we have before us from the ground up. There's a number of approaches that you could use, and by looking at some of these resources, you could think through what the methods are. In terms of the practical ways you could go about observing classes, interviewing fellow teachers, looking at the material that's produced by the students before you carry out your action intervention, and then gathering material from the students after you carry out the action intervention, and then seeing what changes and developments have occurred, dividing the class in half. So you try one action intervention one way, another with the other half of the class another way, and then swap the classes over so both halves of the class are treated equally, and you look at how different actions and interventions bring about different results. So there's practical steps that you could carry out, and there are also deeper ways you could analyse this information and examine what you do and carry out. Often the approaches that we take place are not just simple methods, but they're mixed methods that draw from a number of different paradigms, ideas, and concepts. And so you might want to bring in some various other aspects. Don't make it too complex. Keep focused on as few a number of areas as possible, but recognise there could be a number of mixed methods involved. So I encourage you to engage with resources such as Aiton, Siddos and Burkhoff's qualitative research resource, and engage with some of the chapters that are available to you here that you can read through. Don't get bogged down by these ideas, but recognise these are resources that are there to help you so that you can be more effective in what you do. I also encourage you to go to Google Scholar and to put into Google Scholar some ideas that you have about your topic, such as literacy in science, and then look at others who've done action research projects on literacy in science, and so science literacy, and then look at action research projects, and then see what other scholars and other teachers have done in terms of action research projects in science literature, and then how this is done in schools and in teaching. And then down the right-hand side, you'll see some examples of some resources there that you can open up. And then if you click on Cite, C-I-T-E, you can get a copy of the resource address and details and name, and you can Control-C, make a copy of that, and Control-V, paste that into your resource. And then you can go to the resource and you can read through that and get an idea what other scholars are doing. What are the methodologies that they are using? And you could say in your proposal, in your final project, drawing from similar projects such as, and then you could look at some of the similar projects that have been done and the methods that have been used to study these projects and to study how effective they are. So I encourage you gather some further information on these resources and use that information as well. So there's some great chapters here that you could work your way through. And there's also chapters on data collection, how to carry out interviews. And so one of the methods that you could use, you could write up in your ethics proposal that you are going to conduct interviews with fellow teachers or with students and find out how effective the actions are that you're taking to improve what they are doing. You could also have focus groups where you gather a group of people, a group of students or a group of teachers together to discuss the area you're looking at, and you can gather notes from that and record information from that. So certainly focus groups can be useful. Particularly useful is participant observation, where you can observe what's going on when actions are taken place. That will be helpful to the students, and then you can record what is taking place. Again, being careful that this data is not used in any unethical way, but only in ways that bring benefit to the students and to the school. You could look at media, you could look at books on science and on English and on mathematics and business and other topics, and you could look at the sort of literacy that's in there and that which is going to be more effective, and you could look at how effective this is at meeting the needs of students. You could look at particular approaches, such as experiments or such as graphic approaches or illustrative approaches or art type approaches. And then once you've gathered your data and you come to the next stage of analysing the data, we're going to need to discuss further the steps we can take on analysis. And also we're going to need to discuss further the steps that we can take in the preparation of the one page of ethics proposal that you're going to be putting together on ensuring privacy and confidentiality, ensuring that the ethical needs are being met. And then finally, we're going to talk about the writing up of your project so that it's going to be well written up in the conclusion. So you'll find the detail of this resource and other resources on the Moodle page. And I encourage you to read through those, to take notes on those and begin to work through and apply those in the project that you are working through and preparing. And then I encourage you that there are further resources as well that you can look at there. I look forward to meeting with you in class in week 4. And also engaging with you further in the weeks to come. And I appreciate the effort that you're making in this research project, the Action Research Project, in that I'm sure you'll learn a great deal, not only in this project, but about ways in which you can be more careful with the gathering of data and information and records. And you can be able to use this both formally in studies of the way students learn, but also less formally in seeking to understand yourself and your students and the ways that they learn. I encourage you to keep a diary reflection on your learning, to practice self-care, practice setting aside sufficient time for your study, for every area of your life, and sufficient time to look after your health, your sleep, and all of those other areas that are needed as well. We need to live balanced lives in order to do well in every area of our life for the long term, for the long haul. And I look forward to helping you along this journey as we progress further. Thank you. Let's catch up again soon.